Eritrea's leader visits Ethiopia on Saturday in a historic thaw between former foes. A scientific mega-project to detect extraterrestrial life gets a boost as the 64-dish Meerkat radio telescope is inaugurated in South Africa. And in our Music Makers segment, a special violin performance from a multi-talented VOA international broadcaster. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening, I'm Esther Githuiyuat in for Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. Eritrea's president will make a historic visit to Ethiopia this weekend, cementing a new relationship with Ethiopia after a generation of mutual hate and mistrust. Eritrea's information minister made the announcement on Friday, saying President Isaias Afwerki will arrive in Ethiopia on Saturday after the neighbors declared this week that their state of war was over. Meanwhile, Ethiopian government spokesman told reporters Friday that Eritrea will also reopen its embassy in Addis Ababa, which has been closed since their 1998 border war. The rapid changes come after Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed launched a peace initiative last month, visiting Eritrea's capital last weekend, where he signed a pact with Afwerki on resuming ties, a move that ended nearly 2 decades of military standoff. Cameroonian President Paul Biya announced Friday that he will run for re-election in October. The long-term leader is aiming to extend his 36-year rule. Biya, who rose to power in 1982 when his predecessor retired, is seeking a 7th term in office, a win that could see the 85-year-old rule well into his 90s. An election victory would leave Biya in rare company of Africa's living rulers. Only Equatorial Guinea's President Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo has ruled uninterrupted for longer. Biya, who has ruled virtually by decree since taking office, scrapped term limits from the Constitution in 2008, allowing him to run again and sparking riots in which over 40 people were killed. Now, 67 migrants are now on Italian soil after they were finally allowed to disembark an Italian Coast Guard ship in Sicily late Thursday evening after President Sergio Mattarella made a rare intervention in Italian politics to end a simmering dispute within the ruling coalition while angering the right-wing Interior Minister Matteo Salvini. Mattarella contacted Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte, expressing his concern about the plight of the migrants rescued at sea and brought to Trapani, Sicily, but refused the right to disembark by Salvini. The ship had been brought to the port on authorization of Transport Minister Danilo Toninelli, but Salvini ordered that no one should leave the boat until light had been shed on alleged violent conduct by some of the migrants. 2 of the migrants, believed to be of Ghanaian and Sudanese nationalities, were led off the ship in handcuffs and taken away by police. 8 black rhinos have died in Kenya while being transported by the State Wildlife Service between 2 national parks. A statement from Kenya's Tourism Minister Najib Balala says the rhinos are part of a critically endangered species and died at Tsavo East National Park. An initial investigation by Kenya Wildlife Service showed the rhinos died of salt poisoning after drinking water at their new habitat. The rhinos were among 14 that the agency began moving last month from Nairobi to Tsavo East National Park. Kenya had a rhino population of over 1,200 in 2017, of which 745 are black rhinos, 510 are southern white rhinos, and 3 were northern white rhinos. Poaching has risen in recent years across sub-Saharan Africa, where armed criminal gangs have killed elephants for tusks and rhinos for horns. Often the animal parts are shipped to Asia for use in ornaments and medicines. U.S. President Donald Trump met with British Prime Minister Theresa May on Friday before heading to Windsor for tea with Queen Elizabeth. Those opposed to Trump's visit to Britain are mocking him with a blimp, depicting an angry Trump wearing a diaper. The 6-meter-tall inflatable flew over Parliament for 2 hours on Friday morning during a scheduled protest. The U.S. British Ambassador Woody Johnson, who is accompanying the president, said Trump is not avoiding anything, relying on helicopters. Rather, he is trying to get as impactful a trip as he can get within a 24-hour period. Trump is on his first visit to Britain since taking office nearly 18 months ago. Before leaving Brussels for Britain, Trump brushed off a question about the protests, saying he thought Britons liked him a lot. President Trump has long said he would like to improve relations with Russia. He will get a chance to do so on Monday when he meets Russian President Vladimir Putin in Finland. VOA's Bill Gallo reports on what's at stake when the two leaders hold a highly anticipated summit.
Donald Trump arriving in Britain, the second leg of his European tour. His first stop at the NATO summit in Brussels was tense after Trump pressured European nations to spend more on defense.
We have NATO, then we have the UK, and then we have Putin. And I said, Putin may be the easiest of them all. You never know.
It's not clear if Trump's meeting with Vladimir Putin will result in any concrete agreements. But there are several areas the president has suggested they could work on together, including Syria, where Moscow is backing the government of Bashar al-Assad. Trump says he wants to pull U.S. troops out of Syria, but is concerned about Iranian influence there. There have also been questions about whether Trump will formally recognize Russia's annexation of Crimea, something Trump himself is refusing to rule out.
What will happen with Crimea from this point on, that I can't tell you. But I'm not happy about Crimea.
But maybe the biggest question is whether Trump will use the summit to upend the European Security Alliance, a move that would make many smaller European nations vulnerable to possible Russian aggression.
Those states that do not have their own defense capabilities on a level that would be sufficient, that are relying on NATO's and other member states' capabilities for their defense, they are really worried, understandably so.
Despite all of his stern talk about getting NATO members to pay more for their defense, Trump has not taken concrete steps to reduce U.S. support for NATO. But there are a lot of people in Europe wondering if he soon will. Bill Gallo, VOA News, Washington.
A scientific mega project to detect extraterrestrial life was given a boost on Friday when the 64-dish Meerkat radio telescope was inaugurated in South Africa. Built at a cost of 4.4 billion rands, Meerkat will be incorporated into the complex square-kilometer instrument, which, when fully operational in the late 2020s, would be the world's biggest and most powerful radio telescope. Up to 3,000 dishes co-hosted in Africa and Australia will then be able to scan the sky 10,000 times faster, with 50 times the sensitivity of any other telescope, and produce images that exceed the resolution quality of the Hubble Space Telescope. Audrey Dikhale is a lead operator for the project.
When I was doing my degree studying physics, I was wondering where am I going to land up. And then when I was invited to come take part in this, it was back in 2012. We were only dealing with 7 antennas at that time, and the control software was a bit outdated. So being here now, it feels like full circle, and it's really been good learning curves, and now all I have to do is impart that knowledge to the young ones.
Besides groundbreaking astronomy research, Meerkat is also pushing boundaries in big data and high-performance computing, helping develop systems able to handle the dizzying amount of data fed from each individual antenna to supercomputers buried deep underground to limit radio interference. We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Still ahead on Africa 54, a special performance by violinist and VOA's own Mestawet Shumir. But first, a look at Friday's headlines. More than 3% of the planet's population does not live in the country where they were born in. But what's behind human migration and what makes people move from one place to another? VOA's Elizabeth Chernoff has more from this week's Plugged In with Greta Van Susteren.
On this week's edition of Plugged In, VOA contributor Greta Van Susteren traveled to the southeastern Bangladesh region of Cox's Bazar.
Take a look. I mean, it's unbelievable. This is what they're now going to drive across.
Since last August, more than 700,000 Rohingya refugees have fled here to Bangladesh to flee what the U.S. and United Nations called ethnic cleansing by Myanmar's military. The crisis goes back decades, but it's part of a bigger global migration movement. According to the International Organization for Migration, nearly half of the world's migrants were born in Asia, primarily in India, China, and Bangladesh, with Mexico and Russia rounding out the list of the top 5 countries. The IOM says 10 destination countries host more than half of the world's migrants, with the United States exceeding all the others, with an estimated 50 million migrants as of 2017. Beyond the numbers, it's important to distinguish the different types of migrants who leave their home countries and why, says VOA's UN correspondent, Margaret Bashir.
People sort of have this image of all migrants coming in dinghies or crossing the southern border of the United States with a backpack. A lot of them are coming in business suits, and they're going to Silicon Valley, or they're going to London to work in banks. You know, migrants can be anybody crossing a border to take a job.
Under the Geneva Convention, refugees, like the Rohingya, are specifically asking for protection as a result of war, persecution, or violence in their home countries. Preventing conflict and violence is part of the UN's broader platform to tackle the migration crisis in the developing world, with aid groups and private organizations contributing millions. Creating good jobs to keep young people employed in their home countries is also a priority. But it's also important to consider the longer-term effects of global migration patterns, says Dimitrios Papadimitriou, co-founder of the Migration Policy Institute.
Once people have the knowledge and the means to try to get to a place that they want to go to, they do it. And they do it because they have previous cohorts, you know, their family, their relatives, people from the same village, etc., who did make it over there and succeeded. So they have already created a pathway for them to go.
Elizabeth Chernoff, VOA News, Washington.
Temperatures around the world are rising as humans burn coal, oil, and other fossil fuels for energy. Burning those fuels releases heat, trapping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. But it does more than that. CO2 is vital for plant growth. While having more of it sounds like a good thing, scientists are finding it is not always that simple. VOA Steve Baragona has more.
Louis Ziska is a plant biologist at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. He's studying what rising levels of carbon dioxide are doing to crops like rice.
Now we know that CO2 is plant food. It will make the rice grow more, but it's more complex than that.
Ziska and his colleagues recently found that rice grown under high CO2 levels expected by the end of this century had lower levels of protein, iron, zinc, and B vitamins. That's a problem in countries where rice is the staple food.
It's the sole source of calories for almost 2 billion people in the world. And so whatever happens to rice is going to have a big impact on the global community.
It's not just rice. Other studies have found corn, field peas, soybeans, and other crops also lose some nutritional value as CO2 levels go up.
We think there's a dilution effect as the plants become bigger with more CO2. There's an imbalance between all the additional carbon in the air and the soil nutrients that are not compensating for all that additional carbon.
It may work like this. Plants need carbon dioxide from the air to grow. With more carbon dioxide in the air, plants grow bigger. But they also need nitrogen from the soil to make proteins and some vitamins. Nitrogen levels have not changed, so the plants are bigger, but the nutrients are less concentrated. It's not all bad news. Vitamins that do not contain nitrogen may do better.
Vitamin C, you'll be happy to know, is mostly carbon. And so we think that as the CO2 increases, that vitamin C may, in fact, go up.
But the impacts of rising CO2 go beyond food crops. Under these sheets is parthenium, a nasty, invasive, allergy-producing weed. It makes a chemical that kills other plants. Zizka wants to know if Parthenium is going to make more of it as CO2 levels rise.
And if it is, then this plant's ability to dominate the landscape will be enhanced. And given how noxious this plant is, we really want to know that.
For 30 years, Zizka has been asking how rising CO2 will affect plants and the creatures that depend on them, from crops and weeds to pollen that feeds bees.
When we think about the effects of CO2 on plants on the human level, obviously important, but keep in mind that it's more than just people. It is going to affect all living things.
Even after 3 decades of research, Zizka says, scientists are just getting started. Steve Baragona, VOA News, Beltsville, Maryland.
Now, football fans will be watching Sunday's World Cup finale on multiple screens in bars and on their phones and on televisions at their home with their friends. One day, they could be following the action in 3D. Researchers in the computer department at the University of Washington in Seattle are developing a way to watch soccer games and other sporting matches as if you are actually in the stadium by using augmented reality devices. Here's VOA's Faith Lapidus.
This Microsoft HoloLens virtual reality headset gives researcher Konstantinos Ramatis the unique experience of watching a soccer video game in a more realistic way, in 3D on a conference table. Ramatis says to convert YouTube highlights of actual games into 3D, his team started with FIFA video games, which can be played and viewed from almost any angle.
We first detect where are the players, we find their pose, we segment them from the foreground and background, and then we also, for each player, we estimate their depth. And the depth is you can think of it as a 3D shape representation of the player, and then we visualize it in the augmented reality device.
There are still challenges to overcome to improve the presentation of the ball and the tendency of the players to disappear, especially when they come into contact with one another.
Some bigger things going forward is to how do you create a long game, right? So we just showed a little bit of a little snippets from the game. Can you create a long, 2-hour long game, right? An hour and a half. How do you do it for other sports? Our algorithm is very focused on soccer, but can you do it for basketball? Can you do it for baseball? You know, all this tennis and so on.
And sports are just the start. In the near future, the team says their 3D technology could expand into other fields, such as music and entertainment. For writer Faiza El-Masri, I'm Faith Lapidus, VOA News.
Now, from mutton soup to caviar to biltong, Russian gastronomy is now being enjoyed by football fans from around the world who are in Russia for the World Cup. We get more from VOA's Mariama Diallo.
Before the month-long tournament began, Russian cuisine was probably unknown to many football fans. From the beet-based borscht soup to a dish with salted herring, eggs with mayonnaise, to local pelmeni dumplings and Russian potato salad, fans have been able to experience the country's culture through its food.
We've been eating some traditional Russian food, smoked meat and bean soup, lovely. And I've had the mutton stew. You had
I had the chicken wings and the smoked bean casserole as well. Great food, great culture.
As for their other friend sitting across the table...
I can't even remember what it was I had. Mutton soup, wasn't it? Mutton and vegetable soup and then a spatchcock chicken. Really good.
At this food festival, one visitor says he was surprised by how some of the dishes reminded him of home.
I tried a dish of meat with potatoes, carrots, and onions, which is a dish very similar to the one we have in Brazil, and which is very traditional here in Kazan. So I felt almost at home.
Lots of laughs at this table of mostly Brazilian fans who were happy to expand their taste buds beyond typical Russian food. Marcelo Magalhães from Sao Paulo says his group tried a dish in the shape of a boat, Georgian hachapuri, a cheese-filled bread.
It was a pasta which had an egg yolk and a light cheese. It was really tasty, so I ordered another, and another, and another.
Beer was in big demand. This pub manager decided to make his clients special by serving it in a traditional Russian container, usually used to heat water for tea.
We have a beer samovar, but inside we put ice, not firewood, and drink cold beer.
As the tournament draws to a close, and whether their team advanced or not, many of the fans are going home with newly acquired tastes and maybe a bottle of Russian vodka. Mariama Diallo, VOA News.
We have a programming note, and on Monday we'll begin airing a three-part series to celebrate the 100th anniversary of Nelson Mandela's birth. Africa 54's Haiti Adams Fitzpatrick will share the stories of everyday heroes who are living the legacy of the anti-apartheid hero.
They're ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Women and men who have taken Mandela's lessons into their hearts and communities. We'll meet the first recipient of the UN Nelson Mandela Prize. Once a refugee, she now brings the gift of sight to tens of thousands in Africa. A New York ballet production is bringing Mandela's life to the stage in America. And from prison cells to church groups, how a band of knitters is stitching together a global movement for Mandela. Join us for a three-part series, Nelson Mandela, Living the Legacy.
The Africa 54 team is very excited about Haiti's series commemorating Nelson Mandela's birth. You won't want to miss it, so join us starting on Monday. And welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. A seaside Queensland tourist area has dubbed itself Australia's first cryptocurrency-friendly town. More than 30 businesses in the southern Great Barrier Reef areas of Agnes Water and 1770 are now accepting Bitcoin in payments in a bid to attract a new breed of visitors. Queensland startup Travel by Bit rolled out its online point-of-sale technology at Brisbane Airport last month. The website allows customers to pay with digital currency like Bitcoin, which is then converted in Australian dollars. Next up, flat shapes that become three-dimensional and can crawl, roll, jump, and even play catch with a simple wave of a magnet have been developed by engineers at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. The structures, strong but also soft and flexible, are printed flat with ink containing tiny magnetic particles. The shapes the team have experimented with include a smooth ring that wrinkles up, a long tube that squeezes shut, a sheet that folds itself, and a spider-like rubber that can crawl, roll, jump, and snap together fast enough to catch a ball. The technique may be used to fabricate magnetically controlled biomedical devices. And finally, reality TV star Kylie Jenner is on track to become the youngest self-made billionaire in the United States, thanks to the booming cosmetics company she launched 2 years ago. Forbes magazine reported. Jenner, 20, debuted Kylie Cosmetics in 2016 and has since sold more than $630 million worth of makeup, adding millions from TV programs, endorsements, and after-tax dividends from her company. Forbes says Jenner was conservatively worth $900 million. The magazine says another year of growth would make her the youngest self-made billionaire ever, male or female. And that's what's trending today. Now, in our Music Makers segment today, we feature one of our own, Mestawet Shumir, a broadcaster with VOA's Amharic service, an actress and a talented violinist. I sat down with her recently as she played the violin, and we leave you tonight with the sweet sounds of her Ethiopian music. From all of us in Washington, have a great weekend.
Welcome to English in a Minute. A corner is basically an angle where two sides meet.
Boxed in a corner.
Let's find out why these two are talking about corners.
What's wrong? You look worried.
My friend Nico quit his job, had a baby, and bought a new house, all at the same time.
How's that going?
Not good. He's out.